few more people coming in, but while we start, let's just share a little bit about that word holiness. I'd like to just share about the word holy. So kiddoshim, kadosh, you know the word holiness is the cognate for kiddush, for kaddish, kiddush, kaddish, kadosh. Is the one I'm leaving out? Chevra kadisha. So what is the cognate? What is kodesh? What does it mean? And what does it mean to you? It's translated in English as holy, but it's not really exactly that. I'm open to suggestions. And if you, when was the, you know, when you say the word holy in colloquial American lexicon, there's some big words. How often does anyone ever say the word holy? There used to be an expression, holy cow, but I don't think people use that expression.
I still use it. But I will say that there's some holy music going on in the background for you, Rabbi Toba. I have a feeling your husband,
a holy husband, promised
your holy
stop
husband
his
is playing
holy trumpet lesson at 12.
Oh.
And so that's why you're hearing the holy music, because it's also holy. Let me go tell him it's after 12.
Oops.
I can't hear any music.
Oh no, I heard it. That's
I heard it too.
It was distracting.
Suzanne, change your monitor. Yes.
He has a private trumpet lesson, and he was having so much fun, he didn't realize it's 12 o'clock.
I think that
it's a relationship has to have these holy moments of compromise and sharing. All right, holy. How many of you have used the word holy in the last 3 months, and in what context? Deb.
I think holy actually is almost a pejorative now when people use it in the phrase holier than thou. I think it's indicative of somebody trying to be more righteous than they actually deserve to be. And I'm not sure how it got to be that that's the only one I can think of in our vernacular anymore.
Isn't that interesting that it's become derogative? And I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
And it's reflective of a secular society that disparages people who have these pretensions to holiness because they do more rituals than someone else.
Right.
Anyone else? Holy, using that expression. Marion, please.
So for me, it has to do with connection. Connection to God ultimately, but
I'm gonna blend it.
Connected to everybody.
Right.
Connection, holy. It's kind of like this inclusive word for me. It makes things bigger. It expands things.
And do you actually use that word? Will you refer to a service like Adahabat Torah as a holy service?
Actually, we just had a huge Torah discussion today that lasted until like 10 minutes ago. It was supposed to go only till 11:30. And yes.
That's kind of like my husband's trumpet lesson.
Right. Yes. And we definitely refer to it as a holy space. And of course, Monty wrote one of my favorite songs of his, Kiddoshim, which is absolutely, and what I remember from that teaching from actually Ted Falcon is that it's not I am holy because you are holy, it's I am holy. See if I can say it correctly. It's I am holy. It's not something to be or because. It's
right.
I'm holy, period. I am in the image of God. I am holy.
Beautiful. Thank you, Marion. Let's give someone else. Anyone else have any comment about holiness? Lee. Thank you, Marion.
No, I was going to say the same thing. Whenever I read this Torah portion, Kiddoshim, I think of Monty's song and it starts going in my head. And because we do it always at this Torah portion, if we have a service, or also at the high holidays. And it's just so, it just makes me feel holy.
Huh. So I think the three of us should sing it. Ready? Kiddoshim, Tihiyu, Kedoshim, Tihiyu, Ki Kadosh Adonai Adonai
Elohechem. Anyway,
it sounds much
you
better.
didn't do it justice.
Yeah, but it's fun. Yeah.
All right. I always like to teach. So the opening of this parsha is Kedoshim Tihiyu, you shall be holy. Ki, because Ani Adonai Elohechem, because I am God and I'm holy. So then the next sentence says how you should be holy. And I always like to ask, no one's allowed to look it up. I always like to ask, what do you think? It's important to know, and I wrote it down there, of the number of mitzvot in this parsha. Do you remember I said there are 51 mitzvot in this parsha? So you have 51 choices. The first of the 51 mitzvot is next. So God says, be holy, and here's how to do it. First mitzvah, don't look it up, just tell me what you think it is. And nobody ever gets it right.
Love.
Love what? Love who?
Love your God.
So Lynn,
Love
what are you saying?
love people,
About
love the stranger, love your
no,
neighbor.
no, not those. Just tell me one. What's the next one? There's 51. Which mitzvah are you saying? Love. Don't look at Lynn. No cheating. No cheating. Okay, so number one, Lynn is saying love, but she's not sure loving what. Lee.
Love your neighbor.
Okay, you're saying love your neighbor. Okay, who else has one? Those are wrong. Anyone else?
Love yourself.
Love yourself. Beautiful. So it's
Love God.
okay. I'm saying it's not about love.
Oh.
So the next thing, and this is so powerful and so important, the 10 commandments talk about parents. Remember, it's the 4th commandment, honor thy mother and father. But they also talk about how you treat your parents in another way too. So it's fascinating. God says, Kedoshim tiyu ki kadosh ani Adonai Elohechem, be holy, because I, the Lord your God, am holy. First way to be holy, ish imo va'aviv tira'u. And tira is awe. Every person, their mother and father, they should have fear, but we like to say the fear is awe, because people don't like to say fear God, but the Hebrew is literally yirah, which is fear. First way to be holy is to honor, respect your parents. How many of you agree with that? How many times have you heard that the way a man treats his mother is the way he'll be a good husband?
Yeah.
I swear I was going to say parents.
And the rabbis say here, what does it mean at the bottom? Revere. The translation is revere. Other translations are fear or awe. In the conservative, in Eitz Chaim, which is what I'm reading, it's revere. And here it says, according to the Talmud, we refrain from publicly challenging what our parents have said or from sitting in their chair. And then there's, of course, a lot more comments about that. And they also say, though, if your parents tell you to do something that is illegal or not right, and if they tell you, don't live in Israel, you shouldn't listen to them. They put that one in too. If you want to move to Israel and they say no, you go to Israel anyhow. But I just love that. I think it's so natural. This idea of being holy is in these little tiny everyday things, like being respectful and considerate of parents and siblings and other people.
Caring.
Yes, Linda's White. Hello, my dear friend.
Hello. What if your parents weren't holy?
Many of us have had to deal with that situation. I remember having a long talk. I have a father that I was estranged from. And I remember when my rabbi from Great Neck, I remember at my first rabbinical conference when I had to cut off my relationship with my father, that's exactly what I asked. And he said, if your father was not holy or if it's toxic, your obligations to your parents are severed if they've severed the relationship by their actions.
There was a very interesting thing in there about when the psychologists were telling children, they didn't say no, they didn't use that word. And my husband was the Hillel director at the Claremont colleges. And there was this one woman, thank you, who was from Beverly Hills, who had two parents who were psychologists who believed in that theory. And she came to me one day and she said, I need your help. I said, okay. I need you to say no to me. I said, tell me what you want me to say no about. She says, not having sex with men. And I said, oh, that's not a problem for me. But the thing that was so fascinating is she became a Chabadnik because she needed the structure that her parents wouldn't give her.
Right. And I think that's the segue into what is the teaching. That's exactly what the teaching is from Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, Alav Hashalom. His teaching is love is about structure. He riffs off the Beatles song, love is all you need, love is all you need. And even Monty, he has Ahava. He had that big song also about love, you know. The Christianity is supposed to be a religion of love. Our God, their God, you know, Jesus was preaching all about love as opposed to our God that was a kind of wrathful God, a God of vengeance. And it's true, you know, the Jewish God has two different aspects to it. Our God is never called a God of love in Judaism. Our God is Elohim and Adonai, a God of compassion and a God of justice. And consequence, I like to think consequences. So Elohim is Deen, which is judgment. If you act appropriately, great, you get mitzvah points. But if you don't act appropriately, you need to do teshuvah and you need to clean out your act. And that God demands that you fix things. You just don't say, I'm sorry, and then get a pass, and God isn't going to forgive you. You have to go and do the work to be forgiven. That's the Jewish aspect of that side of God. God is not a duality, but has different aspects. And God as a whole, just like we do, has an aspect that's more, more serious and an aspect that's more compassionate and forgiving. So we all know the compassionate side of God, which is Yud He Vav He, which they say is Rachamim, which is, of course, from the word Rechem, women's uterus. So Rachamim, compassion, is usually associated, especially in Hebrew, because the word literally comes from uterus. The compassionate side is usually the mother's side. And the side of consequences and judgment is usually dad, although we know that you don't have those gender distinctions anymore. So it's just so curious about all of this and what love is all about. And not all of us at our age, we know that love is just not a simple thing. And you also know you can't command love. And when it says that you shall love, the rabbis go crazy, because how could you love anybody if they're hateful to you? Or as Linda said, how can you love a parent that doesn't deserve to be loved? So there's lots of aspects to this. So let's get started, and we're going to share our screen. I have a PowerPoint, and I invite you to raise your hand if you have questions. We'll teach a little bit, and then we'll have some discussion. Okay. So right now, Rose, it says we're at the end of our slideshow. Wasn't that terrific?
Doesn't it say, kiddo? Oh, sharing is paused. I'm sorry. Here we go. There we go. Resume share. Do you see it now? No.
You'll see it at the end.
No, you don't see the beginning.
No, it's not shared right now.
Or you sure finish quick.
Just hit the back arrows and get it going backwards.
How are we doing here?
There you are.
There we are.
Let's go up to the slide above it first, though.
That says number one. That's
I know. So you goofed. Go down to. All right, leave it. They'll first go down to the last one, though. That is number one. You just put it in the wrong order. So love is not all you need. Again, he was referring to the Beatles song coming from England. I mean, he knows that song too. Love is all you need. But Rabbi Sacks discusses love. And of course, he says love is not all you need. So let's go back up to number one on your screen, Rose. That's great. Thank you. Okay, so Kiddoshim, the holiness code. As I told you, we have a book called Sefer HaChinuch, and it's a wonderful book that somebody spent from the 13th century. Somebody spent a lot of time counting every single mitzvah in every parsha. So if you want to know how many mitzvot there are in a certain parsha, You just go to that book and find it. Right now, you could just go to Google. Google quotes Sefer Chinuch. I wrote down Sefer Chinuch, how many mitzvahs in Parshat Kedoshim, and I got the answer, 51. Anyhow, they're positive and negative mitzvahs. So it's thou shalt and thou shalt nots. Out of 51 mitzvot, Rabbi Sachs decides for this chapter of his commentary to teach about 2 of them. And they're the love of your neighbor and love of a stranger. So the first one is love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. And this second one is, well, I'll go down to love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. So then he goes on and he has this whole thing about this is not the golden rule. And it's not only about love. There's a lot of things about neighbors. Sometimes I remember when I was looking to buy my first house in Sherman Oaks, I fell in love with this little house, and I went back the next day at a certain time during the day. I think I had seen it in the late afternoon after work, and I had a day off, and I went by during the day, and there was the neighbor had a barking dog. And I stayed about an hour. I took a walk, I walked around, the dog never stopped barking. So I knew right away I couldn't buy this house because the neighbor had a barking dog. But sometimes neighbors do things that are just make you hate them. So there's a way of, even if you hate your neighbor, there's still a way of acting in a civilized manner. It's like as if, and you can't even call it love. But the love the rabbis teach, when you go into the commentary, when you look at love your neighbor as yourself, the rabbis go crazy. Who can force you to love someone you don't love? Nobody can force you to love. It never says love your parents, ever. Never uses love your parents, and it never says love your children. It says honor, revere, be kind to, respect, but never love. So the rabbi said, why love in this case? And it's interpreted as act in a way that's civilized, period. You don't have to love your neighbor, but you could say good morning. You don't have to love your neighbor, and you could treat them in a mindful manner. So he says it's not only love, loving a neighbor is also about justice. And he uses this wonderful expression, reciprocal altruism. And that's curious because a lot of times you want to be altruistic, but nobody's going to be altruistic back to you, which is an interesting thing. There's also a very interesting Mishnah that I remember learning about, and I saw in another commentary. This is about loving your neighbor. And it comes from Mishnah, which is 2nd century CE. And this is what it says. Because it also says in the beginning of this parsha, this is not the whole parsha by the sentence, by the way. Let me go back and read you the whole sentence. I should have put the whole thing here. Verse 18 in chapter 19 says, you shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against your countrymen. Love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. So lo tikom velo titor. Revenge or grudges. That's what comes first. And then this is the second part of the sentence. So the Mishnah says as follows. By the rabbis in Mishnaic times, revenge here is a very down-to-earth thing. So suppose they say you go to your neighbor and you ask to borrow his scythe, or just say let's just call it his lawnmower. I can't even pronounce that word. How do you pronounce it? S-C-Y-T-H-E?
Scythe.
Scythe. That thing I guess you cut hedges
with is right.
or something?
Yeah, scythe is right.
All right, let's just say scythe. But he says, no, it's a very delicate instrument, and I'm afraid I can't lend it out. Then sometimes later, he comes to you and he asks to borrow your shovel. And you say, you didn't lend me your scythe. I'm not going to lend you my shovel. That's taking revenge. No blood feud, just a little nasty pettiness. So for the rabbis, even that kind of nastiness and pettiness is considered revenge. But if that's revenge, then the rabbis in the Mishnah say, what does it mean to hold a grudge? So it sounds like it's the same thing, but they said not quite. Suppose your neighbor refuses to lend you his scythe, and later he asks to borrow your shovel. If you say, sure, take it, I'm not a cheapskate like you. You may not be taking revenge, but you're guilty of holding a grudge. So it's that little extra thing that you add on, you know, where you become like who said earlier, holier than thou. It's kind of like that, holier than thou. So in light of these two examples, what do the words follow then? You shall love your neighbor like yourself. What does it imply? A general principle of human relations. It doesn't require you ever to do something impossible. What is demanded is you take the high road and not do anything to your neighbor that you wouldn't want done to you, kind of like the golden rule. So it's a very curious thing, and it's been discussed from the beginning of time. Relationships, especially with the people who live next to you or in an apartment above you or below. After living in an apartment in New York City for years, I'll never live in an apartment building with someone above me again. All right, so the second mitzvah is when a stranger comes to live in your land, do not mistreat him. Treat the stranger the way you treat your native born. Love him as yourself, for you were strangers in Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Rabbi Sachs says no other nation ever presented themselves as having been born in slavery and exile. So Jews know about being a vulnerable minority, and it's crucial for a system of morality. Again, it's not a feeling. It's not just about love. It's about doing what's right and how you treat people who are vulnerable and in a precarious situation. Let's go on to the second slide. So Leviticus 19, which is the first chapter of the Parsha of Kedoshim, have many laws for moral life. They also have laws for social justice, and there's also kind of weird laws that you can't even put into any category. His big question is, what do these disparate laws have in common? So you have so many different types of laws. Is there a common thread? So for instance, he gives us some examples of what you can find there. The moral laws are things like don't gossip, don't hate, don't bear a grudge, don't take revenge, which we just talked about. Then there's the social justice laws. Leave part of the field for the poor. Don't withhold wages. I think about that all the time when like the cleaning lady comes, to always make sure I give her her check right away. Don't use false weights and measures, and of course, so many others. And then there's weird laws that really nobody quite gets, although I've heard some wonderful understandings about them. Don't wear a garment mixed with wool and linen. That's called shatnez. The Orthodox still practice that today. Don't eat blood. Don't lacerate yourself. And that's kind of like no tattoos. But I think that one is out the window in our culture today. And don't practice divination, which is also pretty much out the window. I just did my tarot cards this morning. Whoops. All right, moving right along. So the question is, what do they have in common? And Rabbi Sachs says, what you see in all of them are three things. There's orders, there's an order, there's limits, and there's boundaries. Reality has structure, whose integrity must be honored. And then he wrote, if you hate or take revenge, you destroy relationships. So you destroy the structure which keeps the world working. If you commit injustice, you undermine trust in which society depends. And we see that with yesterday's decision about Chauvin and the decision against this policeman, 3 counts of guilty. If right now that wasn't the verdict yesterday, we would be having riots in the street. So society has to depend on its justice system. Later on in Deuteronomy, when it says, when you get to the land, what should you do the first thing when you get to the land? This is also like asking how you be holy. Does anyone remember? What's the first thing you do when you get to the promised land? And you can unmute if you'd like and call out. Who remembers? It's in the, I'm not even going to tell you the Parsha. It's in Deuteronomy.
Was it set up courts?
Yes, who said that? Deb, perfect. A lot of people say you should set up a school or a mikvah or build a synagogue. The first thing Moses said, the very first thing is you need to set up a court system with judges all around the law, all around the land, And not only the court system, Deb, but what else? Shoftim v'shotrim, and the police to effectively maintain the law.
Yeah.
So judges and shoftim and shotrim are like the people who, the police, who will make sure those laws are carried out. Those are the first two things that a society needs. And that's what happens. That's why you need social justice. And then, and if you don't have those boundaries and that kind of order, society will fall apart, as we see what happens across the world today. And if you don't respect integrity of nature, it leads to environmental disaster. And that's why you have so many of those other laws about the fields, keeping your field fallow for a year, etc. Many other rules. Don't pick the fruit off of trees until they're a certain age, etc., etc. All right, let's unshare for a minute and just have some response right now. So we're going to unshare. We'll be back in gallery view, and comments up until now with what you've studied. This is, for me, this is so enlivening, and it just makes so much sense, the way he presents things, and just ready for some reactions. What you like, what you don't like. Myrna, unmute yourself. Go ahead.
Okay. In my mind, I want to back up to the why. And I'm wondering, it appears that human nature is not by nature a positive, loving response to one's neighbors. It's negative, it's vindictive. And would this stem back to the fact that we were expelled from the Garden of Eden, and therefore we've got to, we're no longer good, innately good. We're innately flawed.
That's a fabulous question. I believe that human beings are like the Lord of the Flies. Even all of us. You put each one of us here right now on a desert island. After, I'd give us 10 days of civilized behavior. After that, I'm going to be stealing your orange, your coconut. I'm going to want your leaf, your palm leaf that's keeping you warm. I think that, yes, we are lizard brains. We're animals. And we need to be taught and cultivated and practice how to live in civilized, period. Even in the Garden of Eden, because they were childlike, I don't think they were any better.
Really? Can I follow up?
Yeah.
Okay. Robin is tired of hearing me say it, but she taught me not to say but. She taught me to say yes. And, because that's more affirmative. You're talking about Lord of the Flies. Well, recently on my news feed on my phone, there was an item about a group of young boys from Polynesia or somewhere in South Pacific. You saw it?
Yeah. I saw the same one.
I saw it on 60, I think 60 Minutes. I saw it, yeah.
Oh, is that 60? Okay.
On 60 Minutes.
So, and apparently they did not react the way the boys in the fictional Lord of the Flies.
They built a better community, right?
They cooperated, and it was a beautiful, heartwarming segment.
Yes, and yes, and how often do you think that would happen versus Lord of the Flies? Which is the anomaly, and which is based on your world's wisdom and experience?
Okay.
And the situation in our world today. Look, if you read Sapiens, or if you read any of the Harari books, they're fabulous. Yuval Harari, the Israeli author. So the book Sapiens in the Seshel, how did we become who we became? But we are people of tribes, and we were taught to be suspicious. It's wired in our brain as we evolved. We only trust the familial unit. The biggest unit was about 100. And that was it. Everybody else were after you. They wanted what you have, your land, your clothes, your food. And you had to be very suspicious and not embracing and not loving and not including. So that's where we evolved from, and that's still part of our nature. We're a very tough, Homo sapiens are a very tough group. And I think this idea of teaching kids from a young age how to be civilized is so important. And you can't teach love. You can teach rules. You can teach actions. You could teach please, thank you, yes, no, but you can't teach love. The actions lead to a loving kind of feeling, loving presence. Let's have someone else, some comments. We'll get back to you, Myrna. Let's have someone else comment. Feedback. Robin, yes.
Hi, Mom. The idea of rules and lines and boundaries, it makes me think of what we hear so often in recent years about I have rights and I have freedoms and don't take away my liberties and blah, blah, blah. I have a good friend who teaches first grade, but she teaches the kids, the lines are your friends, meaning the lines like on the street where you stay in your own lane of traffic and you could go, zigzagging and crisscross all over the place, but we would all be the worse for it if you did. So sometimes those lines and borders and boundaries are a good thing for all of us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I remember in my first class we had this wonderful class, like the rabbinic method or rabbinic mindset. I don't know what it was called, but they said in Judaism, there's nothing about rights. Judaism does not have your rights. Judaism has obligations. So mitzvot are you're commanded and you're obligated. There's no rights. I don't have a right to, there's no rights to liberty in the pursuit of justice in Judaism. The right is an obligation to do what you need to do to create justice. That's your obligation. You're commanded to do that. But you don't have rights of personal liberty. You have an obligation to act in a certain way that protects yourself and others by wearing a mask, and you have no right to not wear it. If you don't want to wear your mask, stay home. So it's a very curious thing. That rights versus obligations is very serious in Judaism. Like I can't just give charity. We have no word for charity. The word for charity is tzedakah, which is a tzaddik is a righteous person who is commanded to take care of those in need. Not because I feel like it, because it's something I must do. I'm obligated to do that, to be a citizen of this world. And it's so important to get that across. Okay, other comments so far. So we're going to get deeper into his orders and limits and boundaries. I think a lot of us, I was an iconoclast. I broke a lot of rules. I was a full-out hippie. No bra, the whole business. I couldn't believe I was wobbling around like that, I wore my skirts up to my they didn't go below my pupik. I look at my pictures. I can't believe I ran around like that. But I really believed in breaking rules. And I believe that's how you make a better society. But I've come a long way since that. I think there's a time to be iconoclastic and challenge rules. But rules are also very necessary. Unfortunately, when you see the society being so unjust, there's a lot of rebellion. I rebelled against the industrial economic, complex, military industrial complex. Look how far that's gotten us, right? It's as bad as ever. But the Black Lives Matter and their protest against injustice is very critical. That's their obligation to protest against injustice. So sometimes boundaries and order needs to be broken in order to do the right thing. Yes, Marian.
First of all, one thing is the thing we saw in 60 Minutes was, I think, 7 or 9 kids. It's more manageable. The Lord of the Flies was a bigger group.
Yeah, I think they were like 30.
And I think that's part of it. They also all grew up in a society. And part of what I was going to say is they were modeled love. They were modeled respect. Right. All of this stuff was modeled. We do believe in action as well as that, but to me, it's like, don't do what I say, but what I do, you know, it's like my parents would always say, don't, they'd always make that comment. Just do what I say, not necessarily what I do. And it's like, you get to divorce that, and it's a really difficult thing. The other thing I wanted to talk about is this more subtle piece. It's when I take revenge, it's something that I've, see if I can describe this. I don't even realize is festering in me, but I'll blurt something out. And it's what that is the aha, I'm holding on to something and I don't even realize I'm holding it. Some people call it passive aggressive. It's just this thing that I'm struggling to manage. Let's just put it that way. And the last thing I will say is that there are all these scientific studies that show that it only takes one or two negative things to make a habit or make something bad. And it takes about 5 positive things to put that. So there's something about our innate reptilian brain that has us being fight or flight, protective, all of that stuff. And it takes more to put it into a positive realm. Anyway,
brilliant observation and wonderful wisdom. And that's why there's 51 mitzvot just in this parsha. Part of what I've learned from my years of meditation now is, again, that one time that you blurt out what's been building up, you take your little revenge, that could destroy relationships. One time. Or it's a week of repair with a friendship or how many of you have experienced that? I mean, how many times you want to take something back that you wish you hadn't said? And so what I learned in meditation is how to censor yourself, how to quiet your mind and all these different practices of, before you speak, take 3 steps back, walk out of the room, always say, let me think about that before, like, what kind of idiot are you? It's so easy for us to just react all the time. And it takes a lot of work and practice. And that's, again, why there's so many mitzvot that you study and you look at and you learn and you talk about and remind yourself relationships are fragile. To maintain healthy relationships, love takes a lot of work. When people fall in love, they're really lusting and they're falling in lust. And within a year, they've fallen out of the lust and out of love, because love is a lifetime of work. Moving right along. Okay, let's go back to our slides. And we're ready for the next slide. Isn't that a beautiful picture? I couldn't believe I actually found that on Google Images. It was actually under Love Your Neighbor. Isn't that fabulous? Okay. There is an order to the universe. When it is violated, there is chaos. However, when order is observed and preserved, we become co-creators of sacred harmony, the holy, Kiddushim. So I just want you to look that over for a minute by yourself. Read it to yourself again and see if you digest it. Mary Douglas, in her book about purity and impurity, a wonderful treatise about the laws of kashrut and stuff, also talks about the whole purpose of creation was to make order out of chaos. So the whole point of everything was that there was just chaos, tohu vavohu, as it says in the book of Bereshit, and that God started to create in order to make order. And this is what he's riffing on, Rabbi Sachs. We need order in our lives. You need the lines, you need stop signs, you need rules, you just need these things, or we just become little better than animals. And if order is observed and preserved through mitzvot, according to the Jewish tradition, and of course in religious traditions, other words, but also following the rules of any society that you live under, Dina Malchuta Dina. So the rabbi said very clearly, since we were in exile a lot, the law of the land is the law. Dina Malchuta Dina. Wherever you live, follow their laws. When two commandments, and that makes you holy. So what is Kedoshim? Kedoshim is observing mitzvot, observing laws. You become a co-creator of sacred harmony. Isn't that beautiful? How do you become Kadosh? Becoming a co-creator of sacred harmony. I just think it's fascinating. So why are these two commands to love in Leviticus 19? Because love belongs in an ordered universe. Clear rules create and sustain social order. Real love is not sentimental. It's not a Valentine's Day card. It's about discipline and justice. I only wish real love could be like a box of chocolate. If it could be so easy. Real love is not a box of chocolate. It's about discipline and justice. And Marion, unfortunately, means we can't blurt out those things that are in our head because we get into big trouble for opening up that part of ourselves that we really need to keep hidden, because we have to deal with it on our own, and we have to treat the person we're interacting with in a respectful and mindful and caring way. A healthy society needs a shared moral code. Otherwise, there is chaos. We require rules, standards, and values, routines, and tradition. So before I go on to that last part, can you guys imagine what it would have been like today if Chauvin was not found guilty? Mm-hmm. And that's where it says a healthy society needs a shared moral code. If they didn't find him guilty of murder, it would have been an eruption. It would be such chaos now. I don't think we could even go out in our cars today. I didn't put in my PowerPoint any of the stuff that he talks about with raising children, but it was fascinating. Peterson's book, and I actually ordered that book. Did anybody else order it? Or am I the only person that keeps ordering books that I don't have time to read? Did anyone else order that book? I'm just curious. All right, when we get back to gallery view. And I also need you to know that as I'm reading it, I put tabs in that this is a good sermon for high holidays. So I think this is a good sermon too, because it's about parenting. So he wrote this book. Jordan Peterson wrote a book, 12 Rules for Life, an Antidote to Chaos. And when I went online, I noticed he actually, since that book was so popular, he already has book 2 out. And part of this essay on Sachs is based on Peterson's book, very popular in England, he said. And it's about how you raise children.
I'm pretty sure Rabbi Sachs never had a hippie period the way you did. There's a lot, I read Peterson's book. There's a lot in there that your hippie self will not agree with.
Oh, Deb, I'll have to get back to you because I plan on reading the book. I think it might have some good ideas for high holiday sermons. But I'm not going to like it, huh?
He's very conservative, very.
Okay, good to know. Well, sometimes a good sermon is when you don't agree with somebody and make a point for it.
I would put real money on you and him are not the same political party.
Well, anyhow, in his book, Life is Best Lived with Balance of Order. That is where we find meaning that justifies life and its inevitable suffering. And you know, that's so important. I deal with a lot of people who are shattered from loss, disease, death, etc. And to find meaning with so much suffering is so hard. But he's implying that if you continue to trust order and balance and follow rules and do mitzvot and keep caring and being helpful with others, you'll be able to find meaning in inevitable suffering. I think that's so curious. Let's just do the last slide and then we'll share a little bit. We have about 10, 15 more minutes. Okay, is this my last slide? All right. So Leviticus 19, moral, political, economic, and environmental laws, which are a supreme statement of a universe of order in which we are custodians. I think we all have to feel that we have that ability to do that. What's the word I'm looking for? We have so much we can't control, but we do have control over a lot. And we do have control over having, I'm losing that word when you have agency. We have agency in our life over morals, over politics, over economics, over environmental. There's so much agency that we do have in these areas. We are co-creators and we are the custodians. So this chapter, which it's not just about order, it's also about humanizing the order through love. Love of neighbor and love of stranger. This is where Sachs pulls it all together. The Torah says, don't hate, don't take revenge, don't bear grudge. And he compares it to Peterson, who says, with rules, we can avoid a sense of victimhood, resentment, and envy, which leads us to desire for vengeance and destruction. So I think that analogy is so important. So think about this. The different grievances in our society of different groups that they're victims, we're victims of, and or they resent, or there's envy. And if these feelings of victimhood, resentment, and envy then lead to wanting to have vengeance and destruction, look what happens to a society. It can simply fall apart. So by the Torah saying, don't hate, don't take revenge, don't bear a grudge, you can actually avoid having a society fall apart. Again, by following basic things that you have agency over and control over. If all of us walked around taking those little petty vengeances and revenge things and not treating each other in a civilized manner, what kind of relationships would we have? With ourselves, with friends, with family, with neighbors, with our larger community? Life would absolutely be impossible. So life-changing idea number 30 are clear rules, proper discipline, help to establish, maintain, and expand order for fulfilled children, families, and society. Love is not enough. Relationships need rules. So let's unshare. And, Deb, maybe you're right, but maybe it's just because when I was a hippie, I was 50 years younger, and now I'm more conservative than I realized. But when he talked about child rearing, I just shook my head. He said here, when you raise children, too many of us indulge our children. We don't teach them the rules because we don't want them to be mad at us. We want them to like us. I think about my terrible. I don't think I was a great parent. I was working so hard and I was a single mom, and I gave in a lot because I didn't want to alienate my daughter, and I couldn't stand when she told me she hated me, which was a lot. So, I gave in and coddled her and indulged her probably more than I should, because I had a very hard time saying no. So I agreed a lot he said. He says Jean-Jacques Rousseau's misleading idea that children are naturally good. I don't believe children are naturally good at all. And we see that, like Robin and all of us who have been teachers, know that. And he's saying the best way to raise happy, creative children is to let them choose themselves. I don't know. I don't think so. I think they definitely need the lines and the rules and the order. Modern families simply are paralyzed by fear that they will no longer be liked or loved. They're afraid to damage their relationships by saying no. Without rules, social skills, self-restraints, and a capacity to defer gratification, children grow up without an apprenticeship in reality. Did you all read this conclusion? If you have your book open, we're on page 166 in the middle of the page. Clear rules make secure children calm, rational parents. Clear principles of discipline, punishment, balance, mercy, and justice, so social development and psychological maturity can be optimally promoted. Clear rules and proper discipline help the child and the family and society maintain and expand order and protects us from chaos. I agree with him. All right, ready for some comments, feedback. I'm curious, how many of you think you were good parents and raised your child well? Myrna, you can gloat and brag because you have a beautiful daughter. Rose, what were you going to say?
No, I'm just raising my hand. I think I did okay as a mom. I mean, I like how my daughters turned out as people.
So do you think you disciplined enough or had enough rules that you were able to say no to them?
I had a husband that helped me in that area.
I thought things a little bit differently. My son.
I can't hear. Lynn, talk louder.
This is Lynn. My son Ari, when he was in high school, he wanted to have earrings. And I said,
wait, you froze. You said,
you know, it's your choice. I said, it's your choice, but you will suffer the consequences if the rabbis at your school are not happy with it. So he didn't do it. But when I went out of town, he got magnetic earrings and put them on his ears and scared the out of my mother, and she screamed. But I want you to know that when Ari got to college, he told me the fact that I didn't say no to him, but I made him to make responsible decisions, didn't require him to act out. Where when he got to college in the dorms, there were so many students acting out and going wild, but he never needed to, because I allowed him to help him have structure in good decisions.
Bravo. I am very proud of you. My mother said no earrings for me. My first day of college, I went to the dorm mother. She got out her needle, lit the match, stuck a hole, and gave me my earrings. I showed my mother. Unfortunately, she didn't help me the way you did, but I wish you were my mother. It would have been great. I definitely acted out. Tony, go ahead.
My youngest son 1 year gave me for my birthday beautiful pierced earrings. And I said, they're beautiful, but I don't have pierced ears. And he said, well, you have a choice. You can either change them for the other, or you can have your ears pierced. I had my ears pierced, and I had so much fun with that. So he started me with something that I really enjoyed. Something I did. My kids are all so thoughtful, and I don't know, they got there on their own, but all three of them are just really wonderful.
Yeah, I've met your sons. They're lovely human beings. You did a good job. You and Eugene did it together. Yeah.
Yeah. My youngest one took us all to Cabo for a week when it was my 80th birthday. I mean, he bought our airline tickets. We were in a penthouse. I mean, it was fabulous.
He recognizes his obligation to the parents who raised him. Amen.
Well, but he said, we haven't all lived in the same house for a long time. I wondered afterwards how it was going to be, but it was wonderful.
Wonderful. Gladys, you had something to share. Go ahead. You have to unmute, Gladys. We can't hear you. Gladys, you have to unmute.
Many years ago, my husband bought me diamond earrings, and I did not have pierced ears. So he put in the box, he was a comedian, if anybody knew him. I don't think anybody, well, a few people here might, I don't know. Anyway, he put in there, I think you met my husband, Tony. So anyway, he put in a hammer and a nail. And the idea was to pierce my ears. I didn't have pierced ears at that time. And I wound up making them screw-on earrings. But years later, when my daughter turned about 16 and said, she was going to get her ears pierced. She said, come with me, Mom. So I did. Then I had them again put into pierced earrings, which I gave her when she got married. And so she has them. But the nail and the hammer, it was a typical joke my husband would put me through. I mean, that was his humor. But that was the pierced earrings also.
You needed 2 more holes in your head.
You know, it's so curious to me how this earring story, everybody has a story about earrings.
I know,
this
isn't
is
that
great.
funny? I didn't even think about it till Tony said it.
Right. I guess it's kind of like a metaphor for something. Lee, go ahead.
It's not about earrings. I'm trying to wrap my head around that they said in the chapter that we as parents were afraid that our kids won't like us, but then the commandment is that we are to honor and fear and be in awe of our parents. So I'm having a hard time reconciling.
What's the disconnect? I don't understand.
I mean, if as parents, if we're so worried about that, we want our kids to like us, but the kids are commanded to honor their parents,
and they don't follow the commandments.
I'm saying I'm having a hard time with that.
Right. I mean, we teach the kids they're supposed to follow these commandments, but they don't.
Right.
My daughter had a splint put on her. She was so skinny and little. In 3rd grade, she was taking her little foot and stomping it. I hate you, Mom. I hate you, Mom. I hate you, Mom. So hard that she broke her leg. She had to wear a cast from her "I hate you, Mom" rants. I mean, I was the rabbi. I taught her it. You think that went in what ear did it go in? It went into no ears. I mean, now, thank God, my daughter is a beautiful human being, and I believe she treats me with great love and respect, and I'm very grateful. But parents had to put up with a lot. Ultimately, if you say it long enough and you teach it long enough, maybe something goes in. But you have to deal with kids not honoring and not respecting and being obnoxious. And,
I remember your daughter when you were at Stephen Wise Temple, and your daughter would come there when you were the rabbi there. But she was quite young, obviously, at that time.
Right. Right.
And you showed me a grown-up picture of her. Very nice.
Yeah, she, when we first got there, I didn't have babysitters. And I was trying desperately to find some. I went through a lot of babysitters. And she would come in my black robes, and she would crawl up. And Stephen S. Weiss is a big shul. And she crawled up and would hide under my robe on the bimah if I was delivering.
Oh my God! See, we didn't know
She didn't want to be alone, and it took a few months until I found someone. And the board called me in. Everyone was yelling at me. Haley Herschel, like, "What are you doing here?" I said, "You got to give me a break. I have to leave. I can't just leave her with anybody." And I had no relatives, no family. It was very hard.
I remember you had her with you a lot.
Yes.
You too.
The babysitters didn't last that long.
Joan just agreed. I see Joan shaking her head or wanting to say something.
Well, I remember.
You remember that too, Joan, right?
Yeah, she was so loving, and you had this daughter that you had to be with.
Right.
She had to be with you.
It's hard, a lot of challenges for children and parents growing up. Deb, go ahead, and then Linda.
I wanted to say that my parents were so heavy-handed when we were younger. And I remember they used to scream, "Well, you don't have to love us, but you do have to respect us." And we did. We would never have said, "I hate you," ever. I can't even envision those words coming out of my mouth.
Wow.
But when we all grew up, and there was 4 of us, we couldn't wait to get out of the house. And we only communicated with my parents out of guilt. So when I raised my kid, my parents were not terribly religious. But when I raised my kids, I deliberately moved into a Jewish community. I really do believe it does take a village. I think you're right, Tova. It's extraordinarily hard to do it yourself.
Right.
So I raised them with, we raised them with, they had kind of a shorter leash because we did force them to keep Shabbos and kashrut and everything else, but in an environment where the other families were doing that too.
Right.
So between their Jewish school and the synagogue and our communities, I knew they could be wandering all Shabbos afternoon. Whoever's house they were in was sort of parenting like I was. And the only rule was to call Motzei Shabbat and tell me where they ended up. And I think now, and I remember my daughter screaming at the top of her lungs, "I hate you, Ima." And I actually took that as such a badge of courage on her part. I took it as such a nice thing. Oh, she knows my love is unconditional and she can get that off her chest. And I would say, you know, that's a very hurtful thing to say. I think you can express yourself, but I think you'll be sorry you said that later when you want a big hug from Ima. But
Deb, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, that's beautiful.
Time, the proof of the pudding is my kids call just to, they're adults. They have their own lives now, but they call just to check in. Hey, Mom, how are you doing? I just wanted to check in all the time. So to me, I think that's when you get your report card back, if you were a good parent or not.
Amen. I think my sweetest times with, you know, law, I mean, we did Shabbos all the time. And that time when you bless the child, I do that now with all my communities. I really use that time when you bless it. It wasn't just a pro forma, Yivarechecha, you know, Yehei like Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah. I use that time honestly. And I would say, I'm sorry that I did this. I want you to know how much I care. And I would say, and then I had her bless me. And she would stand on the chair and she'd put her hands on my head and she'd say, I'm sorry. I said, you know, she would, and it was such an important time. So every Friday night we knew we would be able to talk to each other from a real place, as open as we can be. And it was a really blessed and holy time. And when she comes over now with her boyfriend, we still do that. I take her privately to the side and we have those moments. So I think the rituals are so rich and so important, and they lead to helping to overcome some of that misunderstanding. Linda Zweig, and then Myrna, and then Lynn. Linda Zweig.
I had something come into my life that really was very powerful for me. You don't have to defend the old you. You don't know then, now you do. You did what you could with what you had at the time. And as with all things in life, you evolved, you've grown, you moved on. So if you find yourself trying in vain to defend the old you, argue on her behalf, please stop. You don't have to do that. She was someone you parted ways with gracefully, but after much suffering, and anyone in your life cannot do the same. That's their issue. It's their job to catch up, not your job to go back. You don't have to defend the old you. You didn't know, and now you do.
Love it.
Wow.
Love it. Love it.
That powerful.
Love it.
Beautiful.
Can we get a copy of that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Gets to me immediately.
If you send it to Rose, Rose will kindly send it out.
I believe I did the best I could with what I had. I had a difficult relationship with my mother, more than difficult, but as she went into dementia, as she began whatever, I became the most attentive daughter, the most loving daughter, the most I could. And the thought in my head was, I will model to my 3 daughters what you do when your mother is old. I have one daughter who didn't get it. And I'm in the process, we are estranged, and I'm in the process of working on and understanding it's not my issue. It's not about what I did or didn't do. I did what I believed was right, and 2 out of 3 times I got it right, and now it's up to her. And now it's her issue. And I'm struggling to get that it's not about me.
You're actually following. You're actually following the Rabbi Sachs dictum. You're setting some boundaries, right, and you're allowing. With that, you're able to heal, and you're able to deal with the reality, which is still sad and hurtful, and yet it allows you to go on. Yeah, thank you, Linda. Who else wanted to share? Myrna, you had something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I'm just taking.
And then Linda.
I'm just taking a deep breath and hugging you for a change, Linda.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. for a change. we did a real hug a couple of days ago.
We did. We did.
I think most of you know Judy Mallor, and her husband was our rabbi at Temple Akiba for almost 39, almost 40 years. And I remember one lesson that he taught, and it was a human nature or lesson about parenting. And he said that children, in order for them to mature and grow and become adult, at some point they have to rebel. And if they don't, then and they keep it buried inside them, that's not healthy. And he said many years ago, out on the farm, a boy could rebel by going out behind the barn and smoking a cigarette, and his father would find him and beat the hell out of him. But he had his rebellion. Well, when I became a parent, and we were at a stage in the 60s, 70s, where the parents were supposed to be more understanding and not so much the friend of the child, but understanding. And he said, in our situation, it was so much more difficult because smoking a cigarette behind the barn wasn't going to get the child whipped. They had to go further out, and the parents were wanting to accept it so much. And at that time, Robin, it was a question of marijuana. And it wasn't you. And so I've always remembered that if human nature requires rebellion in order to fully become adult, then having these strict boundaries doesn't allow for rebellion.
That's an excellent point. And I know it's getting late, so let's just wrap it up a little bit here. I think the answer to that is something I've thought about a lot. Part of Judaism also is arguing with God. We don't have compliance. Judaism is about, I disagree, and here's why. On the one hand, it's this way. On the other hand, it's that way. And it's also not black and white. There's a lot of gray areas. There's a lot of nuance. So yes, I think there is rebellion, and it's actually encouraged. You know, all the great leaders argued. Abraham stood up to God. Hashofet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat. The judge of all the world is going to kill the Sodomites. There must be one righteous person. Moses stood up to God. All of them. Elijah, Isaiah, all of our leaders, all throughout the biblical, all throughout. In the Mishnah, it says, machloket l'shem shamayim, sofo l'kayem. Any disagreement for the sake of heaven, in the end, is upheld. It's important to have holy disagreement. Rebellion for marijuana, it was rebellion. It's like smoking a cigarette in the bond. It's just all relative. That was her rebellion. And look how great she turned out. You know, I marched against Vietnam. My parents were horrified. Look how great I turned out. I think it's absolutely necessary. I think Rabbi Mallard was right. And it is also part of Jewish tradition. And ultimately, you come back to realizing the importance of rules. So at our ages now, I could shake my head and agree with everything that's said in this chapter. If I read this chapter 50 years ago, I might be, like Deb said, in disagreement, like I will be with Peterson. You know, and I think that's also part of it too. And parenting has gone around the block. How many times we know everything changes so quickly, like the right way to do it and the wrong way. But the basic understanding here is that you need to have some kind of order, and you need to have some norms and standards and moral obligations that people live up to in order for society and justice for society to work. So yes, and given that, there are lots of things that don't fit neatly into a box. So let's have a conclusion now. As you want to make your final comment, this is called a closure. And I always loved this when I learned this in pedagogy when I was a teacher. When you end a session, you have some kind of closure. So what did you get out of this? I found personally it's very inspiring. It makes me think. I love teaching this. And so often when you have a jumble of different kind of mitzvot, like what do they have in common? I think he was just brilliant being able to pull it together, finding a common thread. So let's have a couple of comments about what you got out of this session, what you're taking with you. Let's tie it all up. Your sense of, was this a meaningful time that you spent this last hour and 15 minutes? Ready for comments? Linda's, please.
I don't know if this was you or the textbook, but I wrote down something about no rights in Judaism, we have obligations. I don't know, is that yours or
that came from one of my favorite teachers, Rabbi Wexler, when he taught us about the basic ingredients.
But this book inspired you to say it. So that was very meaningful.
I wish I was original enough to say that, but I'll tell that was one of my favorite professors, Rabbi Wexler, New York. Other comments? Who haven't we heard? Has everybody said something? Pam, I haven't heard from you. What did you get out of all this?
I agree about the justice and the rights and most of those things, but all these rules, I didn't like it. I thought it was too much, too many rules. And when I'm that way and my kids are that way, they want to know why. And then we can have like Lynn had said before, we can have like a discussion why it's important not to run in the street. I mean, but more grown-up level, why these rules are there. And then it would make sense to me and I would want to follow it. And if there was other kinds of rules that just seemed arbitrary, I have no use for them. And I didn't have any use for teaching them to my kids. On the other hand, there's a lot of rules in running a Jewish home and kashrut and all that just sort of, this is what we do in a Jewish home. And it wasn't like me saying, oh, you have to do it. It's just the way it was. And I think that in that way, the kids kind of got rules and boundaries, right. And learned, you don't just.
Right. And that's beautiful. And thank you. And you know what else? That made your family cohesive. This is what your family did. And it made everyone feel they belonged together. That shared sense of the Neshka's home, this is what the Neshka's home does. See what I'm saying? Yeah. Suzanne, we haven't heard much from you. What did you get out of this chapter in our study?
Well, parenting has changed so much over time. The story that I tell is that my 25-year-old daughter, who's now 60, called me. And she said, Mom, I hated it when I was growing up and I had to help you with the laundry and the cooking and the cleaning and all of that stuff. She said, but I look around at my friends and I can take care of myself and they can't. Thank you, Mother. And that was the most amazing thing because without her helping me, I would never have gotten through college, which I did at 30.
Yeah, yeah. Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Who else? Judy Blake, comment?
I raised 3 boys. We decided to kashrut our house to show the kids when my oldest was a baby. So they grew up in the rituals and understanding of it and of Judaism. And to this day now, with Zoom, we Zoom every Shabbat if we can't, while we couldn't physically, and still with my niece in New York, we Zoom every Shabbat and light candles together. So we've really, it's really kept a bond. But it's interesting how my husband has one younger sister, slightly younger, who turned ultra-Orthodox, and we don't see eye to eye, to put it literally. And we don't understand why they didn't respect my in-laws, who just both died in the last year.
So sorry for your loss. Yeah. That's too bad, because you did have, your family does share a shared, through the ritual, again, cohesive, and a shared moral code, and, you know, the obligations to one another and the caring for one another. And it's too bad to not recognize that, even when you don't agree with somebody's level of kashrut or level of observance, there's still so much everybody can share. It's too bad they weren't able to see that with the in-laws. I'm so sorry. Okay, anything else anyone else wants to say? Leslie, why don't you take us home? Leslie Geffen.
She left.
She just said
she has to leave. Okay, she knew I was going to call her. Anyone else want to have the last word? Anyone else?
Funny.
Thank you.
Okay, Deb, you could have the last word. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say I'm preparing to say goodbye, literally in the next 2 weeks, to my youngest. She's 18. She's lived at home for the whole of the pandemic doing coursework online, but she has gotten her second shot and she is so ready to go. And she said, Mom, no offense. She said, I don't want you to take this the wrong way, but I don't want you to be the one to have to take me. She's picked to go to University of North Carolina at Asheville. We live in LA, and she wants her car. And she said, I'm going to do it as a road trip. I said, you are not going to do it as a road trip alone, young lady. And she said, okay, well, I'll figure something out. So she's my baby by a lot. My boys were 8 and 10 when she was born. Trevor, who is almost 30, my oldest, is driving my youngest cross country and setting her up in an apartment in North Carolina by herself. And you know what? It does. It warms my heart. I must have done something right that he will take this responsibility on. And it makes it a little easier saying, okay,
I think that's a great way to end. Thank you for sharing. That's a heartwarming story. Rabbi Sachs, Alav Hashalom, would be very proud. So with that, thank you all for joining us. I love studying together. Let's make some time to do this again very soon. If some of you want to email me and tell me another chapter you want to do coming up, let me know. We can add something on. Just bless you. Be well. Linda, lots of prayers, continued healing and health, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, Rose, for hosting us.
Thank you, everybody.
Shalom.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful. Great to see everybody.
Great to see you.